You're standing in Washington Square Park, and there is food walking around your feet. A few 100 pounds of meat on thin, red legs. It doesn't run. It comes closer if something rustles in your hand. No animal on Earth lets a human get that close that willingly. And no animal on Earth does a human so stubbornly refuse to pick up. Ask yourself honestly, why not? You probably went straight to dirt. They're diseased. They spread filth. Rats with wings. That answer sits so deep it doesn't feel like an opinion. It feels like a fact, something you've always known the way you know fire is hot. The trouble is the answer doesn't survive checking. Daniel Haag Wackernagel at the University of Basel spent years collecting every documented case in which a city pigeon passed a disease to a human being. He combed the medical literature from 1941 to 2003, which is 62 years, the entire world, every city. He found 176 cases. Not per year, total. Across 6 decades, on a planet where pigeons live in literally every city and land on people's shoulders. Then it gets stranger. There really are about 60 organisms living inside a pigeon that are dangerous to humans. But only 7 of them ever actually made the jump. And nearly every one of those transmissions, 99 and 0.4%, traveled through the air. Through dried droppings kicked up as dust. Through attics, ventilation shafts, forgotten roof vents. Almost nothing traveled through the meat, which means the fear you're carrying is pointed in the wrong direction. The dangerous thing isn't a pigeon on a plate. The dangerous thing is a pigeon attic nobody has cleaned in 20 years. You are afraid of the wrong organ and the wrong process. And now the question gets real. If a pigeon is safer than you think, if it walks into a human's hands on its own, if it breeds faster than a city can chase it off, then why isn't there a pigeon farm in every county in America? Why is there no pigeon in the meat case at Kroger? Because there used to be. Not at Kroger, obviously, but in every yard, every monastery, every estate, and it didn't leave on its own. Start with this. A pigeon is not a wild bird. Not even close. The one pecking a crumb by your shoe descends from the rock dove, and it was the first bird humans ever domesticated. Before the chicken, before the duck, before the goose. Mesopotamian clay tablets describe pigeon keeping more than 5,000 years ago, and Egyptian hieroglyphs do the same. In Cappadocia, people carved dovecotes directly into cliff faces. That domestication looked strange. Humans caught almost nothing and chose almost nobody. Rock doves nest in ledges on cliffs, so humans simply built a more comfortable cliff. A stone tower with hundreds of niches in the wall. The bird moved in by itself, because it was safer there than on a real cliff, and it turned out to be a brilliant invention. A dovecote worked like a living refrigerator that restocks itself. The birds flew out to feed in the fields, on somebody else's dime, but never the owner's, came back, raised their young, and every few weeks the owner climbed a ladder and lifted the fledglings off the shelves. Fresh meat in winter, when no other fresh meat existed. In medieval Europe, the setup was standard. A dovecote, a rabbit warren, and a carp pond. 3 sources of fresh protein in February. The meat wasn't even the main prize. Pigeon droppings, nitrogen and phosphorus in nearly pure form, were worth more than any manure. People boiled saltpeter out of them for gunpowder. In Safavid, Isfahan, more than 3,000 towers went up for the droppings alone. 60 feet tall, up to 70 feet across, all of it to fertilize melons and cucumbers. In the Nile Delta, mud and straw pigeon towers still stand, and stuffed pigeon, hammam mashi, is still a holiday dish in Egypt. In Europe, the pigeon also became politics. In France, the right to keep a dovecote belonged to the nobility. The flocks fed on peasant fields, and the peasant had no legal right to touch them. Resentment piled up for centuries and came out on a specific date. On the night of August 4th, 1789, the National Assembly abolished the exclusive right to dovecotes as its own separate article, alongside feudal dues. The pigeon mattered enough to make the list of things a revolution tore down. That held until the 1800s. Then, the pigeon vanished from the table across nearly all of Europe and America inside 2 generations. And the reason wasn't fashion, or squeamishness, or the law. The reason was sitting inside the pigeon. Take a chicken. A laying hen produces more than 200 eggs a year. A chick hatches with its eyes open, covered in down, standing within the hour, and pecking grain on its own, which means the egg can go into an incubator and the chick into a brooder, and the parents aren't needed at all. The entire broiler industry rests on that single fact: 5 or 6 weeks, 4.5 pounds, and the bird is finished. Now take a pigeon. A hen lays 2 eggs, not 10, not 20, 2. Almost always exactly 2, and that isn't an accident. The squab hatches blind, nearly naked, weighing about half an ounce, and it cannot eat grain, physically cannot. For its first week, it's fed something birds aren't supposed to have at all, which is milk. That's what it's called, crop milk. In both parents, in the male exactly as much as the female, the wall of the crop begins shedding its own lining, and what comes off is a thick, curd-like mass, roughly 60% protein and more than 30% fat. Richer and more nourishing than cow's milk, richer than human milk. The parent takes the squab's beak inside its own and pumps the stuff straight down its throat. The whole process is switched on by prolactin, the same hormone that runs lactation in mammals. Out of thousands of bird species, only pigeons and doves, flamingos, and emperor penguins can do it. And this is where the economics breaks. An incubator will hatch a pigeon egg without any trouble. The problem comes right after, because there is nothing to feed the hatchling. Crop milk can't be bought, can't be synthesized, can't be swapped for formula. Only living parents make it, only out of their own bodies, and only for about a month. Which means every single market squab has 2 adult birds permanently attached to it, working full time. Do the math on that. A pair of pigeons produces roughly a dozen squabs a year, each about a pound. The largest pigeon operation in the United States, Palmetto in South Carolina, keeps 100,000 breeding pairs, and it puts out only 40 to 50,000 birds a month. Its current head, Tony Barwick, says he's been backordered for 15 years, and there is nothing he can do about it. Total squab production in this country runs around 1,300,000 birds a year. Broiler chickens in the same country run over 9 billion. That's what happened in the 20th century. The chicken didn't beat the pigeon on flavor or fashion. The chicken beat it on arithmetic, because a chicken can be multiplied without parents and a pigeon can't. The moment industrial poultry crushed the price of chicken, the pigeon went from a poor family's winter meat to an expensive restaurant item, and its place on the American table was taken by fried chicken and pot roast. The word for it survived. Squab is still printed on menus in serious restaurants, and almost nobody under 50 knows what it means. But all of that explains only one thing, which is why nobody farms pigeons. It explains nothing about the real question, which is why you can't simply take the ones already sitting in the park, for free. A few hundred of them per square. That question does have an answer, and it's a lot less pleasant. It eats what the city eats. A city pigeon spends its whole life inside a patch about a mile across. It doesn't migrate, it runs a furious metabolism, it breathes faster than you do, and it swallows sand and fine grit off the pavement to grind grain in its gizzard. Everything that settles on the sidewalk ends up inside it and stays there. Lead from old paint, cadmium, zinc washing off roofs, combustion byproducts. The bird doesn't flush any of it out. It accumulates it. In the liver, in the kidneys, and above all, in the bones. In New York, Fame Kai and Rebecca Calisi tested 825 pigeons collected over 5 years, and they found something that should unsettle you. Lead levels in the birds rose in summer, exactly the way lead levels rise in children in summer. And broken down by Manhattan neighborhood, lead in the pigeons tracked the share of children in that same neighborhood whose blood lead sat above the safety threshold. The bird turned out to be an honest readout of what a kid 1 floor below was breathing. The pattern isn't local to New York. Researchers in Poland studied pigeons living along a major highway where soil lead runs more than 5 times above background, and in the breast muscle of those birds, they found both the metal and the fingerprints of oxidative stress. That's the exact cut of the animal a person would eat. The European limit for poultry meat is 1/10 of a milligram of lead per kilogram, and 0.05 of a milligram for cadmium. Measurements of city pigeons in Dhaka, in Seoul, in Mexico clear that bar routinely, and liver and kidney clear it many times over. In Torreon, Mexico, where a lead smelter operates nearby, tissue readings came in hundreds of times above the limit. A farmed pigeon eats grain and lives in a clean building. A park pigeon eats the city. So it all seems to add up. We don't eat them because they're contaminated. A logical answer, a scientific one, a grown-up one. Except logic has never been what stops people, and it isn't what stopped them here either. Run a quick thought experiment on yourself. Someone offers you a pigeon raised on a farm in Pennsylvania. grain-fed, veterinary inspected, entirely clean. Would you eat it? Plenty of people still say no, and that has nothing to do with lead. Paul Rozin at the University of Pennsylvania spent half his career on exactly this machinery. He showed that disgust follows rules closer to magic than to hygiene. The first he called contagion. Once something has touched something disgusting, it stays disgusting forever. Rozin dipped a sterilized dead cockroach into a glass of juice, a roach cleaner than the fork at any restaurant, then lifted it out. People refused to drink. The second rule is similarity. If a thing looks like something disgusting, it is that thing. People refused to eat chocolate fudge molded in the shape of dog droppings, while knowing perfectly well it was fudge. Reason doesn't help here. Rozin said it plainly, that arguing with people doesn't work, and only exposure does. The pigeon fell into that trap perfectly. It isn't dirty in itself, it lives in dirt that humans made. It eats our garbage off our pavement under our windows, and the dirt transferred onto the bird the same way it transferred onto the juice after the roach. Then somebody named it. In 1966, New York City Parks Commissioner Thomas Hoving, writing a false panic that pigeons were spreading meningitis, called the bird a rat with feathers. 14 years later, Woody Allen put the final version on screen in Stardust Memories, Rats with Wings, and the phrase went everywhere. The sociologist Colin Jerolmack later counted that after 1990, it showed up in nearly every newspaper article written about pigeons. 30 seconds of screen time handed the bird a life sentence. And notice that the sentence rests on nothing but habit. Religion doesn't forbid it. The pigeon is kosher, and it was a sacrificial bird in the temple in Jerusalem, the offering for people who couldn't afford a lamb. It's halal. Millions eat it in Egypt, and in southern China an entire industry stands on it. 111 million breeding pairs, and something like 1.5 billion birds a year. Egyptian researchers who measured metals directly in the breast muscle of pigeons in Damietta came back with risk figures for lead and cadmium below 1, meaning inside the acceptable range. Half the world eats this bird without a second thought. The other half can't make itself look in the bird's direction. Although if you do look, there's quite a lot there, because the creature you distrust too much to put in your mouth is one of the most astonishing animals humans have ever dealt with. Shigeru Watanabe at Keio University showed pigeons reproductions of Monet and Picasso and trained them to tell the two painters apart. Nothing remarkable, you'll say. The birds memorized the pictures. So he handed them canvases they had never seen before. The pigeons kept sorting flawlessly. Better than that, they carried Monet over to Cézanne and Renoir, and Picasso over to Braque and Matisse. They hadn't learned images, they had learned style. Richard Levinson and Edward Wasserman went further and sat pigeons down in front of work that takes a human 10 years of training. The birds were shown microscope images of breast tissue, benign or malignant. Within 2 weeks, a single bird's accuracy climbed from 50%, which is pure guessing, to roughly 85%. And when the votes of 4 pigeons were pooled into one collective answer, the flock hit 99% correct. That's the level of a trained pathologist. Your ability to find your way home in an unfamiliar city runs on a phone. A pigeon does it without a phone, from hundreds of miles out, navigating by the magnetic field of the earth, by smell, and by infrasound you can't hear at all, which is exactly why armies took them to war. On October 4th, 1918, an American battalion in the Argonne Forest was surrounded and taking fire from its own artillery. The last remaining bird, a pigeon called Cher Ami, went up through the bullets, took a round through the chest, lost a leg with the message capsule left hanging by a tendon, and still covered 25 miles in 25 minutes. The shelling stopped. Almost 200 men walked out alive. The bird died of its wounds 8 months later, and its mounted body still stands in the Smithsonian. The Dicken Medal is Britain's highest award for animals in military service. Pigeons have received it 32 times. Only dogs have received more. And this isn't just something from a book. Rooftop pigeon lofts in Brooklyn, Sunday races, men waiting for a bird to come home with a stopwatch in hand. The sport has been passed down in American cities for generations. It also involves serious money. In 2020, a Belgian hen named New Kim sold at auction for $1,900,000. Same biology, same species. One bird costs what an apartment in Manhattan costs, the other sits on the curb while you walk around it in a wide arc. Because a city pigeon isn't a wild animal that wandered into town, it's the descendant of escaped homing and show pigeons, an abandoned pet that humans bred, tamed, and then stopped taking home. And this is the moment to remember what happened to its relatives the one time people decided to eat pigeons seriously. The passenger pigeon was the most abundant bird in North America, 3 to 5 billion of them, somewhere between a quarter and 40% of every bird on the continent. Flocks passed over the forest for hours and blacked out the sun. One nesting ground in Wisconsin in 1871 covered 850 square miles, and the ornithologist Schorger later estimated about 136 million adult birds inside it. Then came the telegraph and the railroad. The telegraph told hunters where a flock had settled. The railroad carried barrels of iced meat into the cities. One ammunition store in the town of Sparta sold 512,000 shotgun shells in a single season. People believed there was an infinite supply, that the bird physically could not be used up, that it was like air. 5 billion to zero took about 50 years. On September 1st, 1914, a female named Martha died at the Cincinnati Zoo. 29 years old, trembling from paralysis, the last of her kind on the planet. She never laid a fertile egg in her life. Her body was frozen inside a 300-pound block of ice and shipped by train to the Smithsonian, where she still lies. Now go back to the park. The bird at your feet isn't trash and isn't a glitch in the city. It's a domesticated animal older than the chicken, one that humans bred themselves, spread across the planet themselves, and then stopped feeding. It stayed in the squares because there is nowhere else for it to go. And the only thing standing between that bird and Martha's ending is the irrational, unscientific, argument-proof disgust you were laughing at a minute ago. You don't avoid eating pigeons because they're dirty. You avoid it because your brain once stamped them not food, and that stamp holds tighter than any law, any quota, any international convention on the protection of species. One species of pigeon we ate down to the last bird after calling it inexhaustible. The other one survived because we called it disgusting.